All right, shall we get to Victor?
I think so. So we have this conversation with Victor. Really, I'm really looking forward to that. It's gonna be a fun conversation. Matt and I will come on the other side to talk about NFTs. I want, which I'm honestly looking forward to, because they are the more and more I've learned about them, the more ridiculous they seem. I just wanted to make sure that folks aren't misunderstanding Victor at the top
Oh,
here, because
yes.
he is going to be talking about Lavo Jato and sort of giving a more in-depth history of what happened. And at the beginning, he's sort of giving the kind of general like liberal left understanding of Lavo Jato. So I don't want anyone to misunderstand him and thinking that he was like a supporter of this at all. He was just saying like, okay, this is what the general public and like liberals were thinking about this in Brazil and also globally. But we'll get into some really interesting conversations about Lula and how he's already sort of making Bolsonaro run scared.
Yeah, and actually the material politics in Brazil a little bit too. So yeah, take a quick break and then we'll be back with that interview.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Left Reckoning. On March 8th, we got some very good news. Lula da Silva, who has for years been targeted by this very political trial, Lava Jato, had his political rights restored as Supreme Court Judge. Fachin rescinded and dismissed the investigation against Lula da Silva. We're going to talk a little bit about what Lava Jato was, what those implications means for Brazil, and also why there seems to be some other motivations from the Brazilian judiciary for making this recent ruling. But I won't prolong this any longer. We're very lucky to be joined by a Brazilian journalist who was also at Brazil, the Intercept during the Lava Jato case, Victor Pougy, to help us break this down today. How are you doing today, Victor?
Hey, Matt. Hey, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, happy to be with you guys and to talk about finally some piece of good news.
Yeah, I mean, and I know most people who have been listening to this show and also to TMBS over the years have a pretty good understanding of what Lava Jato was. But if somebody were to just be coming across this interview or video and you were to just give them the top line sort of rundown of over what has happened over the past couple of years, that would be really helpful.
All right. So as with everything about Brazil, we're going to have to simplify a lot because when anyone asks anything about Brazil, the temptation is always to like, well, it all started 500 years ago, but we're trying not to do that here and not go that far back. So we're going to think like in around 2013, which is when this task force called Lava Jato started. It started off a small city in the south of Brazil, which it's not very well known outside of Brazil, called Curitiba. It's a capital of a small state in the south of the country. And there was based an anti-corruption task force whose main role was to investigate financial crimes related to Petrobras, the Brazilian public oil company. What is remarkable about this, it was remarkable from the start, which is that Petrobras, the company, is in Rio de Janeiro. Brasilia, where all the politicians are in, is obviously in Brasilia. But in spite of that, this small city in Curitiba ended up centralizing all these investigations for this because they had the role of looking through suspicious financial transactions that were related to Petrobras. Within that whole crazy thing, when they started pulling threads, it started to kind of like blow up the whole political system. And what began as this anti-corruption task force, this transparency, oriented group that was investigated, ended up somewhere in between, becoming somewhat of a political hit job. So there's been people from the day one who saw, look, these guys are bad. They shouldn't be doing this. And there's people who on the first day were enthusiastic about this and were slowly souring onto this task force as it became a little bit more clear that there was some political goals in there. So at some point between 2013 and 2018, somewhat, the leaders of this task force got into their heads that the way their goal should be not to investigate and pull these threads or whatever their initial work was, but they started to have this kind of operate in the logic that the way to combat corruption in Brazil was to remove the Workers' Party, PT, in the Brazilian acronym, which is Lula's party, the party that Lula built throughout his whole life, and obviously many other people. And it's one of the most vibrant parties here in the country, probably the largest left-wing party in the Western Hemisphere. Although I don't want to nitpick into that. There's like people who are crazy about statistics that are going to be mad at me. But, it's a very vibrant party, one of the most important left-wing parties in Latin America. And as these investigators, these prosecutors got into their heads that the way to combat corruption was to combat the Workers' Party, and they got obsessed with getting Lula. So at some point, it is clear for most neutral observers that they got contaminated by some very, very deep-seated political bias. In 2018, which was the last presidential election here in Brazil, Lula was barred from running because he had been convicted by the Lavo Jato task force on some financial crimes supposedly related to Petrobras. He is said to have benefited from an apartment, and that apartment was supposedly renovated by some construction company as a kickback, and there's also like something about his farm where he used to go. So they were linking these benefits to Lula, and they were also linking all that stuff to Petrobras, which is what justified them investigating it in the first place. Because as I said, Lula lives in Sao Paulo, Petrobras is in Rio, most of the political stuff happens in Brasilia. So the way that these guys in Curitiba had to justify investigating this stuff was by saying this all falls within the jurisdiction of these Petrobras investigating task force. So we fast forward a little bit. Actually, we go backward and forth, just going to paper over some stuff in there, which is that we got at the Intercept a leak, a huge trove of documents that are chats that were hacked from the people within the task force. So it's chats that you can see the messages between the prosecutors and the judge. So from reading these messages, it's very clear that there was some very, very improper dealings going on. As I said, the prosecutors were coordinating with the judge, who was going to then judge the case.
I mean, it's important to to really highlight that too. That these links are extreme scandals in themselves. Like what was revealed in them, like what they was actually being said was a scandal. But the fact that there was even this kind of direct line of communication where you have the judges basically giving them tips is a ridiculous scandal and sort of exposes a lot of the motivations of this trial from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, if this had happened in traffic court, it would already be improper, right? You can't be the prosecutor coordinating with the guy that's going to hand the sentence, because this happened to involve the most important political issues of the country. It's obviously a million times more important. But at the end of the day, this task force was a bunch of prosecutors, and there was a judge who was judging all the cases related to this. This judge is Sérgio Moro. And this guy, everyone could tell if they were interested in seeing that he had some very deep hatred for PT and for Lula in particular, as did the prosecutors. And you see throughout the whole thing, the prosecutors and the judge communicating, and the judge being like, hey, don't use this. This is weak proof. Don't go for that one. Oh, did you see this? Use this, use that. So obviously scandalous stuff. But anyways, we're in 2018. Lula is unable to run for president because he has been convicted, and there's a clean slate law in Brazilian politics, a law that was actually signed by the Workers' Party during an effort to fight corruption. So a bunch of laws that are designed to fight corruption were approved within the Workers' Party. So this is something that is often thought to be ironic, which is that the Workers' Party put all these mechanisms in place that allowed corruption to be investigated. They investigated, but the investigators decided to use it against the party, not just to investigate it in general. And now that we see that after the Workers' Party has gone from power, all these mechanisms has basically been scrapped. So if you're an anti-corruption prosecutor now in Brazil, your life's much harder because of the work you did and ended up influencing the election. So 2018, Lula is unable to run because he has been convicted. He was leading all the polls by far. He was extremely popular. He was a favorite to win. But he was unable. He was in jail, and he didn't have his political rights restored. So we had his VP on the ticket, Fernando Haddad, became the presidential candidate. He runs and loses to Bolsonaro, a story that we all know.
And it just needs to be stated again too. Like, this happens in the middle of the presidential campaign, right? Like, this isn't just sort of early on, and Haddad has all this time to really run his campaign, separately from Lula. I mean, this is very much Lula gets invalidated as a political candidate in the height of the political season. It's extremely scandalous, and very much the dates line up very well with the political calendar, right? It was not
a exactly
neutral event.
Yeah, it is, remarkable that such a corruption investigation would be so coincidentally superimposed to the political calendar, right? Mm-hmm. But there's many examples of very, very clearly problematic things that this task force and this judge in particular did, targeting Lula and the Workers' Party. So I want to give you one example, which is a very illustrative one, which is in 2016, Dilma Rousseff. She was the handpicked successor of Lula. She was the president also for the Workers' Party. A remarkable person. She was a Marxist guerrilla during the military dictatorship. She was captured. She was tortured. She came back and won an election to be president. And became commander-in-chief of the armed forces that tortured her. Anyways, in 2016, there's political crisis, and the opposition, who never quite accepted having lost in 2014. 2014 was at the height of Lavo Jato, so it was when PT was more severely wounded at any other time. But Dilma wins just by the skin of her teeth over a center-right challenger. But immediately the strategy of the opposition became to boycott her government. Mm-hmm. And then in 2016, there's an impeachment process open against Dilma by this opposition for these arcane budgetary rules, right? So it's basically finding a reason, right? It's these budgetary maneuvers that are technically illegal, but everyone does, and people have been doing after Dilma was impeached, and no one else got impeached. So it's very clearly just an excuse to impeach her.
Yeah, and it's just, again, for the American audience, it's she's impeached. Yeah, for what you're saying is budgetary maneuvers, or but even take it at a certain level, budgetary mismanagement, maybe, right? You could say, yeah, right. But in the United States, for example, we have had audits of the Pentagon that said that they can't audit hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of where Pentagon money is going. You have to understand that the way that this is reported in the United States in particular always gives the kind of talking points that the right wing is making, right? And not this kind of full context. So what you see with Dilma is very much, as you were saying, they found a reason to create a scandal to take somebody who won an election out of power. And then we see something very similar end up happening later with Lula.
Yeah, because there's like this creation of an atmosphere that there's this feeling anti-petismo that we call in Portuguese, which is like anti-PT sentiment, right? And that became inflated, obviously, for 4 straight presidents were from the Workers' Party, and they represent a not very popular constituency. So there's also there always been sectors that were very hostile to them, presumably, right? This happens everywhere. But then with Lava Jato in 2013, creating the narrative that, the blame of all the corruption in the universe is Lula. And then you have like tropes, circulating on WhatsApp or memes on Facebook saying like, oh, Lula stole like $100 billion trillion, right? I've gotten like images of like, yo, PT stole, and the numbers are like bigger than like the GDP of the planet, right? But like people just spread that.
Jesus Christ.
And then, so it is an atmosphere of like anti-corruption investigation. There's this feeling that like, oh, PT is super corrupt. And then these guys, they find this excuse to start an impeachment process. And it just becomes like a public opinion battle, not a judgment on whether this budgetary maneuver is illegal and warrants an impeachment or not. So, she ends up being impeached because of, corruption is bad and PT is evil and things like that. Ironically, all the people that impeach her are like super corrupt and are like neck deep in the Lava Jato stuff. Dilma has never, like no one has ever found a single like penny. She's like a remarkable woman. And, when she was president, you'd hear like figures in Congress complaining that Dilma was like not up for the game because she wouldn't like be willing to do these negotiations because everyone, insists that she's like annoyingly, impossibly correct, right? And no one can stand that. But anyways, she ends up being impeached in 2016, right? But during the impeachment process, she tries to nominate Lula as the chief of staff in the middle of that, because her bet is that with Lula in the government, Lula is like the Pele, the Michael Jordan of politics, right? And then he's going to be able to pull something off and stop this, which is not an unreasonable thing to suppose. She nominates Lula to be minister, and then she nominates him like in the afternoon. At night, Judge Moro leaks a tapped phone call between her and Lula, in which it is argued by Moro and by Lava Jato that this phone call is Lula and Dilma coordinating about this ministerial position that he's going to assume, because ministers are they have a legal privilege in which they can only be judged by the Supreme Court, whereas Lava Jato, as we know, is not the Supreme Court, is like in the lowest level of the judiciary. So the idea that Lava Jato was putting out there was that Dilma is only doing that to save Lula from being investigated. And then they leaked this phone call. So we have like a judge of like a small town. First off, is not even like a Supreme Court judge or a High Court judge. He's leaking phone calls tapped of the president of the country. And then it turns out that these wiretaps were illegal. So they had a warrant to wiretap between like 12:30 and 4. And this phone call ended up happening at 4:30, right? So it wasn't even supposed to exist. And even if it existed, it's not acceptable evidence. But they leak it anyways, because once it's out in the public and once you can tell people, oh, they are like plotting evil things, it's very hard to go on TV like, yeah, but this was improperly leaked. It just doesn't stick, right? So because of that, Lula is actually like stopped from being minister by a Supreme Court justice who writes a decision saying, no, this is clearly to stop an investigation. He can't be minister. So he wasn't minister. The impeachment happened, but now a few years later, with Vaza Jato, we know that there were many other phone calls that were tapped between Lula and many people on that date. And these other calls show Lula clearly saying, oh my God, I don't want to be minister. Why are they making me do this? Oh, I'm going to have to go and save this government, right? Jesus. And like, he's like talking to a bunch of different people. He's like, I don't want to be a minister. He's saying how he's going to have like to do the political coordination. Like, it is very clear that it had nothing to do with that legal protection, but that's just what they do. They wanted to create a narrative.
Well, exactly, and that's one point, about Lavo Jato, that it was so sinister, but it's worth noting is like they really did understand how important crafting the media narrative was, right? Like that's why you release that, right? Is so you can create this level of doubt and get this public support, which was so necessary in the 2018 election to basically be able to invalidate Lula, as a presidential. Like they knew that they had to build that support way before.
Yeah, because it's not like from one day to the other, right? Lula was president and he left office. He was like popularity was like 85%, 90%. And you can just like from one day to the other erode that. It's like a long process that just keeps going. But
what ends up happening is Lula, they put Lula gets invalidated as a candidate. They put Lula in jail. Lula then gets let out on like essentially house arrest, while the trial is unfolding. But in this meantime, Bolsonaro comes into power, puts Moro up as the justice minister, right? So this small judge who ends up having very clearly serious political ambitions ends up rising, to one of the highest positions, in the Brazilian state, and that's the height of Lavo Jato's popularity. But over the past few years, we've seen more and more like the popularity has began to dwindle because of some of the great stuff that was exposed through the Intercept. Well, not great stuff, but great reporting at the Intercept that exposed horrible stuff.
The bad stuff that great reporting exposed. So, I mean, it is clear cut, right? There's like Lula and Bolsonaro were like the front runners for the elections. And then Judge Moro does something that keeps Lula from running, and then the lane's open, Bolsonaro wins, and then Bolsonaro goes and nominates the guy who stopped his adversary from running and gives him a ministerial position as a justice minister, right? I mean, it is obviously quid pro quo, and I mean, it's just one of like the many obviously scandalous things that happened. But just circling back for something that you said about how Lavo Jato had an understanding that they had to work the media. And that is exactly what it is. It was like more of a media spectacle than a police investigation, right? There are so many examples of things that are just done just for show. If you're reading the chats, and a lot of stories have been written about this, how they're like thinking about how it's going to play on TV, what they're doing, and how they need to alert camera crews to be there when they're like arresting someone. Just one example of that. During these investigations, they did something called a coercive conduction. I don't know if there's any legal term for that in English, but it's something where you're having someone go in for a talk in the course of an investigation. Then they have you come in to give explanations, right? And then you can call a person and be like, hey, do you want to come collaborate with this investigation? And then they're like, sure. And then they go, or they say, no, I don't want to do, screw you. And then if the person doesn't want to go, the judge can then create this coercive, like a way in which they are like obliged to go. They did that with Lula before Lula ever even refused going. So they, instead of saying, hey, Lula, do you want to come in and answer some questions? And Lula says he would have been more than happy to do that, but they don't do that. They just do the thing where they go like with a bunch of police cars at 6 a.m. in the morning with all the camera crews, and then they take him and then put him in an airplane. It's all for show. And Moro, way before Moro was anything, for his during his academic times, he writes an article about an Italian operation. There's also very famous Operation Clean Hands, which was where about the mafia and things like that, very similar to Lavo Jato in some ways. And the conclusion of his article, and you can read his article in like the Law Review Journal of whatever, is basically said like, the most important thing is that to have the media in your side. And then in a situation in which like all media outlets don't have any money, they're firing all the reporters. Like they don't have people to pour over Petrobras statements and find whatever. So like if the prosecutor calls you and was like, oh, I have this document that proves corruption, you're like, sure, I'll run it, right? How could I have investigated this? And so they just keep like spoon feeding all these leaks and scoops to the media. And then they have like these huge like alliance with most of the media here in Brazil, which was just continual and just like critically reporting whatever Lava Jato says. And the fever only breaks with when we publish the leaks that some people in the media was like, oh crap, like we were in the wrong here, right? But I forget what I was going.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's very true, and obviously not being in Brazil, but watching this story unfold from the United States, it was very clear to us what was going on, and it was very frustrating to see outlets like the New York Times and the Guardian, basically, as you're saying, just like accepting whatever was spoon fed to them. And yeah, I do think once those leaks came out, there was a little bit of a shift, but even then, at least in the United States, like there was no obviously like big apologies or retracting of any of the reporting or nonsense that was put out there. But it did, it started to change the narrative, and you could start to feel, especially as Bolsonaro was very clear as to who he was going to be as president before he became president. But as it became extremely clear to even the most passive of observer that he was going to be a disaster, not just for like human life and dignity in Brazil, but even for some of the the right wing and pro capitalist forces that wanted to use him as hopefully like a sledgehammer, that he wasn't going to be as perfect for that job because of his own like incompetence and insanity. You started to see a little bit of a shift in the way that Lava Jato was covered as well here.
Yeah, exactly. And Bolsonaro only got to power because of Lava Jato, right? And he also only got to power on an alliance with like extremely neoliberal forces, right? He nominated, before he was even president, he said, oh, my finance minister is going to be this guy who was like this University of Chicago boy, guy, who was in like Chile during the Pinochet years, doing all the privatizations and stuff. But yeah, you were going to say something?
No, I mean, I just sort of wanted to bring it into, what we've seen, just in this past, past week, right? Where you have seen a shift even within now the judiciary, right? Where now they're ruling, now that basically dismissing the case against Lula comes with some very, strange logic. For like, if they were to be, obviously we want them to throw out the case, but if they were at least to be, have fidelity to the arguments that they had been making before about why this, Lava Jato was legal and valid and all these kind of things. The legal arguments for why they threw it away make it seem like there are other forces at play, more than just like somebody waking up in the middle of the night and saying, okay, I have a very different legal philosophy on March 8th, 2021.
Yeah, no one woke up was like, wait a second, like they shouldn't be doing this, right? And because there's just been like, ever since the leaks first came out, there's first started to open some space, started to open up within the media system to like criticize Lava Jato, and then slowly like there was like building of public opinion turning against Lava Jato, and also within the political system, right? Because even though the media weight of and the narrative of Lava Jato was as proving all the bad that PT did. PT isn't even like the party with the most indicted by Lava Jato, right? The leader of the majority of the government in here in Brazil, of Bolsonaro's government, is like from a party who was like super in Lava Jato, and all the political system was feeling the heat of Lava Jato, right? They were like okay with it because it was worse for PT, but they were also waiting for an excuse to put an end to it. And also within the judiciary, there were like a lot of people who were very uncomfortable by the way Lava Jato was eroding very, very important guarantees that are within the Brazilian constitution. So, for example, one of them, the Brazilian Constitution says very clearly, a person can only be sent to jail after all appeals have been exhausted, right? Mm-hmm. And forever, since the Constitution was first promulgated, that meant that after, there are no possible recourse left, right? They changed this understanding basically just to get Lula arrested in time, because he was convicted by the second level. I don't know what the term is, but if you thinking of, stacking justice on the top of the Supreme Court and down below, like the lowest court, he was only on the second level, and there were like many appeals left. So technically he wasn't going to be supposed to be arrested. But then the Supreme Court was like, you know what? That thing in the Constitution, it actually means that you can be arrested on the second level. And then they arrested Lula, and now they reversed course, right? So we're back to meeting only after the last appeal has been exhausted. So you can see like a lot of like ad hoc, like maneuvering just to make sure like the environment was right to nail Lula down. But then, with the leak in the public opinion, the judiciary already a bit angry with Lavo Jato, or at least sectors, and also the political system, who now is like, well, PT is out of power. Like, you guys done our dirty job. So, stop. We're done here, right? And then we see like all these forces starting to get bigger than Lavo Jato. So what happens is it goes to the Supreme Court with the leaked message that we publish. It is very clear to see that Moro was not an impartial judge. And this is what the Lula's defense has been arguing. And then they sent a recourse to the Supreme Court saying, look, Moro clearly has like these like very personal hate for Lula. He shouldn't be judging Lula's case. And then the Supreme Court was set to decide whether or not Moro was acting in a partial way against Lula. So right before this vote was to be taken in the Supreme Court, and it was, the word in the grapevine was that they were going to say that Moro was in the wrong, and he was partial and biased against Lula. Before that happened, Fachin, which is that other judge, who is one of the pro-Lava Jato judges in the Supreme Court, writes a decision saying, that thing, how like Curitiba is the center for all the Petrobras investigations. Turns out none of this has anything to do with Petrobras. So all of this is null. Lula should be judged by a court in Brasilia, not these guys. And, like after 7 years of like all of this stuff happening, like only now he realizes. And, the analysis that most people subscribe to is that this was a last-ditch effort to save Moro, because the idea was that, well, we're going to end this. Lula would not have any more reasons to make all these appeals against Moro. And there's an expression here in Brazil. I don't know if there's a similar expression in here, which is you lose your rings so you can keep your fingers. And it was it was that, right? It was like, okay, well, we're going to lose Lula, but at least we're going to have Moro's decision stand against everyone else and everything else. So this is the gambit that he took.
So this decision basically would make it harder for any kind of investigation into Moro's activities, more difficult to do in the future, or like basically stopping what was already ongoing.
Yeah, because basically the idea was like Lula was crying that the refs were biased against him. And then what he said was like, forget about the refs. Like, it shouldn't be happening in this stadium. Like, the ref doesn't matter. Like, we're going to play in a different stadium. So all of this is, forget about it. But one of the other Supreme Court judges, the one who hates Lavo Jato, was like, we're going to vote whether or not Moro is impartial, because he fucking hates Lavo Jato with a passion. And he just want to like burn the whole thing down. And it was like, I'm not falling for this gambit. We're going to vote it. So this vote is on hold. They were started voting, but then one of the justices said, okay, I need some time. I need to read this more. So, they're going to continue the vote later.
Wow.
But this basically was the logic that most people understand was happening, was that the pro-Lava Jato guy gave away his ring so that he could keep his fingers. You know what, Lula is out of the picture, fine, his conviction is null, but the whole edifice of Lava Jato still stands. The other judge was like, screw that, we're going to talk about Moro, and we still don't know what's going to come out of that.
One effect I've noticed about this is it allowed media coverage to sort of still take time to say, well, maybe Lula might be convicted of something in the future, as if he's guilty of something. Can you talk about that? Like, is that sort of stain? Are they still going to try to maintain some kind of stain on him after this?
Yeah, because what they're saying is he didn't say Lula was innocent. He just said the stadium was wrong, but he was going to lose the match here, and he was going to lose in that other stadium. So, if I'm going to beat this metaphor up,
that's good.
But then the Lula's case is going to be picked up by a court in Brasilia, and the judge can or can't, use all the investigative work that has already been done. So he can get all the stuff from Lava Jato, all the witness testimonies, all the testimonies, or the proof, all the stuff, and say, well, it was in the wrong place, but we can still use all of this stuff. Or he can say, screw all of this stuff, we're going to start from, square one. Regardless, it's very, very hard to imagine that anything would happen before the next election. So it's very unlikely that whatever happens is going to have any effect before Lula is able to run for president again. Probably against Bolsonaro. But this is still an ongoing fight, right? Because whoever it is that is going to be judging it is still going to have this case to look at, and is still going to have to investigate this. Although it's very likely that it's going to prescribe before anything can happen. But another expression we use a lot in Brazil, which is whenever anyone's trying to make any predictions, which is like in Brazil, even the past is uncertain. So the future is unknowable, right? Yeah. So it's hard to tell, but what it seems like now is that Lula will probably be able to run normally because there won't be any enough time for anything to happen before the next election cycle kicks on.
And how are you sort of seeing the kind of political read now that this news has come out? Obviously, Lula came out with a pretty big speech, after the decision. Very much, people reporting on it as a campaign speech, talking about how he was saying in his own words that there is no government in Brazil, based on the way that Bolsonaro has been handling it. I mean, what is the kind of general public reaction? And also, have there been any clues about how Bolsonaro and his people and team are feeling, maybe privately or publicly about, the decision?
Yeah. So first of all, just the day of Lula's speech, after 2 years of insane Bolsonaro shenanigans and just no pretense at all of governing, no pretense of empathy, no pretense of being a normal person. Just Lula giving a normal speech where people are are wearing their masks and being normal, right? It was just such relief. It was kind of mesmerizing. Even people who hate Lula was like, damn, the guy's good, right? But then the point is that it kind of re-scrambles the whole thing, because Bolsonaro was basically playing unopposed, right? Because PT, the largest opposition party, the largest congressional bloc, was kind of taken over by the whole Lula fight, right? Because they weren't mounting regular opposition, and even the hard work that was being done by left-wing Congress people was kind of getting lost in the echo, because it's very hard to command any news cycle when you have an insane clown every day doing dumb shit, right? So the day of Lula's speech was finally the day when it kind of the Bolsonaro spectacle went into the back burner and attention was focused on something else. And I think this is something that you guys in the US are going to be able to relate, because Trump used to do this a lot, right? Just suck out all of the oxygen, all of the energy, and no other like conversation could ever happen. Like when there's a guy this insane, like around, right? So now the first immediate obvious effect was that like they don't have like the monopoly of the narrative anymore, right? Now they have to play catch up as well. But it really scrambles up the political map again. Like it's like Brazil 101. Don't make predictions. Don't try to guess what's going to happen in the future. But I'm very stubborn, so I'm going to try to do that a little bit. What has become clear is that there was a lot of like anti-PT euphoria, and a lot of people were ready to like say, oh, the party's dead, Lula is over, none of this is happening, and they were trying to cast PT aside from any opposition bloc. So the other parties were still operating within the anti-PT framework of like PT's toxic, so they were like mounting an opposition, but wasn't very effective. So now we have like the return of like Lula and PT as the de facto opposition. So the rest of the field is kind of like risk scrambling, right? There's like a small left-wing party to the left of PT called PSOL, the Socialism and Liberty Party. And it seems like PT and PSOL are agglutinating in a bloc.
That's great.
Which is an interesting development. There's this like guy that's like identified with the left, but he's like this like very intellectual called Ciro Gomes. He was third place in the last election between Lula and Bolsonaro, and he was trying to be the left-wing opposition, the progressive opposition. He was trying to channel that energy to occupy that lane. But now that Lula and PT are back in the game, he's kind of like having to reset a new course. So that's going to be interesting. It seems like he might be able to lead a center, like from a centrist bloc somewhat. So in my opinion, it before Lula was back, the calculation was going to be who is going to be the person who is going to go against Bolsonaro, right? And the whole energy of the opposition was around that. Now the read somewhat changed and became like, no, it seems that like actually Lula or PT are the ones that are for sure to be in because we do knockoff elections, like in France, for example, which is a wide open field. Everyone fights each other in the first round, and then the two people with the most votes go to a runoff, right? So now it seems, and obviously like this changes like the weather, tomorrow may be different, but now it seems that like it's going to be Lula and PT definitely in the second round, because they've been in every single second round so far in every election. And then Bolsonaro is going to have to fight his like center-right adversaries to get to the second round. But obviously, like it's very risky to make any predictions like this. But this seems like what the field looks like.